The Bible, for me, is a guidebook.
I think it's inspired by God, and I do think it's filled with inaccuracies.
From a historical context, if you're like a literary studies person, the Bible is just another text in many ways, and truth is, I guess I'm a bigger believer in empirical evidence.
It helps me figure out how to live in kind of this crazy world.
The Bible is the most trustworthy book on the planet Earth.
I personally don't think everything should be taken literally, and I think depending on the person, they should be able to interpret the Bible the way that they want to.
圣经至今仍然是可信的。
There's plenty of things that even if you don't believe in God, there's plenty of things in the Bible that can improve your life, if you come to appreciate them, help you gain knowledge and wisdom, and help you to be a better person.
The Bible? That's controversial. Thank you for asking.
You'll see yourself in there. You'll see things in there that remind you of yourself, and it'll make you really want to change. You realize that Bible's not lying to you, but it's telling you truth.
It's a storybook, just like any book that you can buy at the library. It's just a storybook written by some people about some character.
Muchas personas leen la Biblia en diferentes maneras. So, como usted lo lee, es como tú vas a tomar en vida.
I think the values that are presented in the Bible and the stories, I mean, they're all stories that apply to everyday life and things that have actually happened. So I think there's definitely truth, and you can definitely trust in what it's saying.
The Bible is still here. This book is almost 2,000 years old. It still exists for some reason, and to me, that stands out. That means something. It's not coincidence.
Yeah, when I was a student in college, I was not a Christian, and I was sitting out in an outdoor area. And I remember there were these Christians that were setting up these tables, and it was for their on-campus Christian club or whatever it was. And I started questioning, like, what if I was to have grown up in India? Would I have been a Hindu or a Muslim? What if my parents were Muslim? Would I just then have adopted the Muslim worldview and the writings, of Muhammad? Like, what would have happened if I did not grow up in suburban America? And as I was looking at these college students that were putting out their pamphlets and their Christian, booklets and things that were out on the table, and they had some Bibles that were out there, I'm like, right, they're basing this information from the Bible. So how do we know the Bible itself, if that's where they're getting this information about Jesus and God from, what makes that religious document any different than a document that might be Hindu writings or Buddhist writings? Because they all seem to claim that they are the authentic truth.
I think if you just opened the Bible randomly and tried to read it, you could potentially turn to a page that would be incomprehensible or even offensive.
I looked at everything from creation through to some of the horrible, horrible bits in Judges with the genocides and all these horrible things which happen. And so it wasn't like, oh, I picked up a book and it was easy.
So I think it's important to understand the way the Bible holds together.
This is one book, but it's really a compilation of 66 books, right? Written by over 40 authors over like 1,600 years. And I think what puts the pieces of the Bible together for me is that really all of those 66 books are telling one story.
And the fact that we have this one book that is written over such a long period of time by so many different people, and ultimately it all connects and points to Jesus, that's brought me a huge amount of comfort in it, because that's just I mean, it's impossible for you to make a book work like that.
What started convincing me, it was a little by little process. You know, like it mentioned cities, it mentions names, it mentions, you know, it's talking that it's history. And so a big thing for me was to say, like, all right, is this mythical or are these places real? And so then I started looking into the historicity of the scriptures. Because you can go to other religious documents and they can't find that, as I was comparing a bunch. Then a big question was also, you know, like, I assumed that it was so far from what was originally written, because how did they, you know, how do we have today what was about, you know, thousands and thousands of years old? And I found there's a few scholars who they go and study how did the Bible get translated into the English version that I read today. And the more I studied this, and that's what I was kind of very overwhelmed with, because the more I studied it, a lot of my thoughts of why I didn't want to believe it was from God, I began finding there's plenty of evidence to believe that it is trustworthy.
Most amazingly, the people of Israel end up in exile in Babylon. And you would think that would be the end of Israel, because every other people that was conquered by Babylon just sort of, you know, they were conquered, they were assimilated. We don't have any records of those nations. And yet, at the moment when this empire has taken over the people of Israel, these prophets arise and they say, God has not forgotten you, God has not forgotten his people. And they give this picture of what's going to happen. Israel's going to return to the land, and in the land, God is going to meet his people. And then Jesus of Nazareth appears, and his cousin, John the Baptist, says, you know, those prophecies from hundreds of years ago are being fulfilled now in this person. And the idea that this all connects, that the prophecies of Jeremiah and Ezekiel in the 500s, 600s before the Common Era connect to what happens in Galilee in 0 of the Common Era, and that connects to what happens in the church 50 and 100 years later. It's just amazing.
I think a lot of times you have to go back to when it was written, the audience it was written to. Some stories were written as poetry, some were written as songs, some were written as parables and stories. Some were meant to be taken literally, some were meant to be taken in other ways.
We would be missing the point to say, was there literally a prodigal son? Was there a father on a farm in ancient Israel living somewhere, and what was it, a 2.4 acre plot and the son got 1.2 acres of it? I think to think like that in many ways would be to miss the point. Whether that story is historically spot on doesn't really matter in some senses, because the beauty of what's being communicated is so rich and so true that we should listen to the meaning of the text rather than fighting over its details. The question I think we should ask is it true in my heart?
I was dyslexic as a kid, and I'd never read a book in my life. My religious education teacher in school, she lent me a Bible, and I'd never attempted to read a book from cover to cover. I'd kind of compensated for dyslexia. And as I read the Bible, I felt as though I was encountering someone who really I kind of knew already.
If there was anything mystical about Christianity, it's in that moment where something kicks on in me, something turns on where I read something about God and it brings me joy and comfort and delight, or I read something that talks about what I'm like and it sings and it stings at the same time.
The Bible isn't just sort of like a manual so that you can feel better about yourself, but it actually comes to speak into my life about my relationship to money, about leadership, about my lust, about my my relationship to others, about my thinking about people who don't share the same faith as I have.
You know, it's referencing the history of people and how they lived their lives, and that's so applicable today, you know. One generation passing on stuff to the next generation and the consequences of that.
There's a famous philosopher, his name is Alistair McIntyre, and he once said this. I love this quote. He says, the only way that I could ever answer the question, what am I supposed to do, is if I can answer the prior question, what story am I a part of? And you know, I think that's what the Bible is ultimately offering. It's offering a story. It's offering a better story, a story to help make sense of our crazy human existence. I mean, all of us are living in some story.
The Bible having 4 basic plots, creation, fall, redemption, and renewal, they make up what it is that we long for as human beings. The explanation of sin, the need for grace and redemption, the hope of transformation, that we're not abandoned, that we're wanted, that injustice is confronted. All of the plots that make a story great in a secular format are actually the same thing that inform the storyline of the Bible. And so I think that in some sense it is the true human story that underlies our experience and our existence.
Just like Jesus, when people met him, they actually had very strong reactions to him. I think the Bible produces that. You just can't be as neutral about it as you can be even about other ancient religious texts. There's something about it that addresses us and kind of pushes us to decide what we're going to do with it.